The order to stand the vigil came 3 weeks early, in an envelope thinner than my white glove, and when I opened it I had to set down the boot brush in my lap and read the line twice. One name, one date, one post. The post was the plinth at the south end of the plaza of St. Aldwyn, and the date was the 7th of November, and the name at the top of the page was mine. My name is Sergeant Major Owen Halberd of the Household Foot Guards of the House of Calderin, and 100 years before that envelope reached me, a regiment called the Saltgate Lancers had marched out of our capital and never come back. Not a man of them, not a horse, not a color. 341 of them went into the salt fens at the edge of the old border on a winter campaign that history books in this country still do not quite know how to describe. And on the 7th of November, in a cold dawn beyond a frozen reed line, every one of them was lost. The line that took them is not in any book I will name. The cause is not for a story. What matters is that they did not come back, and the city decided, in the years afterward, that they would be remembered with an empty helm. The helm sits on a square of black granite in the south end of the plaza of St. Aldwyn, under a small bronze hood that lets the rain in but keeps the snow off, and around it, on 4 faces of the plinth, 341 names are cut in 2-inch letters. I had walked past it 1,000 times as a recruit. I had walked past it 5,000 times as a guardsman. The name I never looked for is on the 3rd face in the 3rd column down. It is not a famous name. It is mine. He was my mother's father's brother, Lieutenant Aelric Halberd of the Saltgate Lancers, and he was 23 years old when he went into the fens, and my mother had told me about him exactly once, on the afternoon of my passing-out parade, in the kitchen of the small stone house where I had grown up. She had set down her teacup and said, "Your great-uncle wore a coat like that. You know that, don't you?" And I had said yes, because she would not have liked me to say no, and she had said, "He was very good." They all were. And then she had picked up her teacup again, and that had been the end of it. I had been 19. I had not gone to the plinth that night. I had not gone to the plinth the next day either. I had not, in the 22 years since, gone to the plinth on the 7th of November once. I had marched past it in column. I had stood post within sight of it. I had never stopped. I am telling you this so you understand why, when the envelope came, my hand stopped on the boot brush. The vigil is a single guardsman, dusk to dawn, on the centenary of the loss. It is a posting offered by lot to the household foot guards every 25 years, the quarter centenary, the half centenary, the 75th, the centenary. It had never been a halberd before. It was a halberd now. I did not tell the sergeant who had put my name in the lot. I did not tell my wife. I told no one. I polished the boots. I rebrushed the bearskin. I oiled the rifle. I went on the morning of the 7th into the gatehouse and signed my name in the dawn book and walked the long way through the cloister, past the limes, across the inner court, and out under the west arch into the city. The plaza of St. Aldwyn was already filling. Not crowds, not yet, but the early people. The old men in raincoats who come to anything that begins at dusk, the schoolchildren with paper poppies, the mothers with prams, the cathedral chaplain in his black cassock, a knot of veterans from a regiment that had not yet been allowed to die. The cobblestones were wet from the noon rain. The gilded railings around the plinth had been polished. The empty helm on its square of black granite caught the late gray light and threw it back duller, the way old steel does. Around the plinth, on temporary stands, the bronze busts of the 4 officers had been brought up from the regimental museum. The colors, the long crimson silk standards of the Saltgate Lancers, faded almost to rose at the edges, had been carried out from the cathedral and laid on a draped table at the north face, where the public could see them and not touch them. I marched to the plinth. I came up to the post on the 2nd hour bell in the pale gray of 4 o'clock, and I took the post from the sergeant who had been holding it ceremonially since noon. He saluted. I returned it. He stepped down. I stepped up. I set my boots on the marks. I let the rifle settle at my right side. I lifted my chin a 1/4 inch the way the regiment likes. I looked forward at the helm. There is a posture for the vigil that is older than the country. You do not stand at ease. You do not stand at parade rest. You stand at the long present arms, rifle vertical at the right, butt at the boot, muzzle at the brow, the right hand on the stock at the shoulder height, the left at the side. It is not a comfortable posture. After 2 hours your shoulder begins to burn. After 4 your hand goes numb. You hold it anyway, because the regiment that is being remembered held a worse cold for longer, and because you are a marker for them, and a marker does not move. The plaza filled slowly as the afternoon went into evening. I do not know who organized it. No one had been told to come. The radio had read the order at the noon bulletin, and the newspaper had printed it on a small notice on page 2, and that had been the whole of the announcement. But the city came. They came in their coats and their scarves. They came with their dogs on leads and their children on their hips. They came from the offices around the plaza, and from the trams that emptied at the corner, and from the long lines of houses behind the cathedral. By 6 o'clock, when the chaplain lit the 4 braziers at the corners of the plinth, the plaza was full from the railing out to the colonnade, and the colonnade out to the street, and the street out to the bend, and there was no more room. They did not speak. That is the part I have not been able to forget. A plaza of thousands of people, on a cold evening at the end of autumn, and the sound of it was the sound of a single sleeping dog. A boy in front, perhaps 8, asked his father something in a whisper, and the father shook his head, and the boy did not ask again. The tram stopped running on the avenue at 6:30, because the city transport authority understood, without being told, that the bell of a tram is louder than the sound of a candle. The shops on the 4 corners of the plaza turned off their window lights at 7. The cathedral clock struck the quarter, and then, by some understanding I did not see arranged, did not strike again until dawn. I held the present arms. My shoulder began to burn at 6. My hand began to numb at 8. At 9 the wind came up off the salt fens, and at 10 the first thin snow began, and at 11 the snow was a steady fine fall, settling on the bearskin and on the gilded railings and on the 4 faces of the plinth, and on the empty helm at its center. The snow did not settle on the helm at first. The helm was steel, and steel is slow. By midnight the helm had a small soft crown of white. By 1 in the morning it had a full one. I did not move. A thing happened at 1:30 that I had not expected. The chaplain came up to the plinth very quietly with a small folded cloth in his hand, and asked me, in a whisper I almost did not hear, whether it would be a violation of the post if he brushed the snow off the helm. I have thought about that question many times since. He was a kind man. He did not want the steel cold. He did not want the names cold. I looked at him, the way the post lets you look, which is not far. I said, "Father, with respect, leave it." He nodded. He stepped back. He went back to his place at the north face by the colors and stood with his hands folded, and the snow fell on the helm, and the helm wore it. I will tell you why I said leave it. Saltgate Lancers, when they went into the fens, went in a winter very like this one. The histories that I have read say that the first snow of that campaign fell at midnight, on the 7th of November, on 341 men under canvas, and that by morning the canvas was white. I did not want the helm warm. I did not want the helm dry. I wanted the helm in the weather that the regiment had been in. If 100 years was going to mean anything, it was going to mean that. At 2 in the morning, in the deep cold, with the plaza still full and still silent, and the snow steady, I broke the post. I did it slowly. I did not want to flourish. I lowered the rifle to the order arms, but on the cobblestone at the right, muzzle held. I took 1 pace forward off the marks to the foot of the plinth. I took a 2nd pace. I knelt not on both knees, which is for prayer, but on the right knee only, which is for the regimental color, and is what a household guardsman does at the laying of a wreath and at no other time. I set my left hand on the polished steel of the railing. I lowered my head until the brim of the bearskin almost touched the gilded iron. I held. There is no posture in the manual for what I did next. I do not have a name for it. I held the kneel for as long as my body would let me, which was, I am told, 11 minutes. I did not weep. I did not pray, not in any way I would call praying. I simply held on one knee, at the foot of an empty helm under fresh snow, on the centenary of a regiment that had taken my mother's father's brother into the fens at 23, and I let the post be broken for that one reason. The reason was not in any order paper. The reason was not anywhere I could have shown a captain. The reason was a kitchen and a teacup and a sentence, and 22 years of walking past a name without stopping. The reason was that the regiment is the country, and the country had asked me by lot to be the marker, and a marker can do one thing once in 100 years that the marker before him could not. The plaza saw me kneel, I felt them see it. There is a way a crowd of thousands of people breathes in at once, and I felt it across the cobblestones, a small soft sound like a sail filling, and then they breathed out slowly, and then they did the thing I cannot quite tell you about without my voice going. They began to salute. Not all at once. The old men first, the ones in raincoats, the ones who had stood at the 75th and the 50th and the quarter centenary. They raised their right hands to the brims of their hats, the slow, careful salute of men who had not been in a uniform for 40 years, and they held it. Then the veterans, the knot of them at the north face in their berets, who came to the present arms with the silent, practiced precision of men whose bodies still remembered. Then the working men in the back, the ones who had come from the late shift at the foundries down on the river, who took off their caps and held them across their chests. Then the mothers, who took their children's hands and helped them put their small palms to their hearts. Then the boys, the schoolboys, who came to a clumsy attention and held it. Then the chaplain, who removed his black beretta and held it against his cassock. Then at the back of the plaza, on the steps of the cathedral choir, who had come out to watch and had not been seen to come out, began very softly to sing the old vigil hymn of the regiment, the one without words, which is just a held note and a long fall and a held note again, and which was sung at the burial of the old duke and has not been sung since. I do not know how long the salute lasted. The papers said the next morning that it was 19 minutes. I believed them and did not check. I held the kneel until my body began to shake, and then I held it for a count of 50 more, and then I stood. I came back to the present arms. I set my boots on the marks. I lifted my chin a quarter inch. I looked forward at the helm, at the snow on the helm, at the small, soft crown of it. The cathedral choir held the last note of the hymn and let it fall. The plaza did not move. The salute did not drop. They held it with me until the cathedral clock, by some agreement I did not see arranged, struck 3. A car came along the avenue at 3:15. It came slowly, with its headlights off, and stopped at the corner of the plaza, and from it stepped a man in a dark wool overcoat without insignia, without medals, without a hat. I did not know him at first. The plaza did. A whisper ran along the front of the crowd like a thread being pulled, and the old men's hands stayed at their brims, and the veterans stayed at the present arms, and the man in the overcoat walked alone across the cobblestones to the foot of the plinth, and stopped 1 pace from my left boot, and looked not at me, but at the empty helm with its crown of snow. He was the king of the house of Calderin. He was 71 years old. He had come in plain dress without a guard on the centenary of a regiment that he was not required to remember, because the city had remembered it, and because a guardsman had knelt, and because some things, when they happen in a plaza at 2 in the morning under snow, find the man who is supposed to come. He stood beside me for the rest of the vigil. He did not speak. He did not move. He set his right hand against his chest, over the place where the medals would have been if he had worn them, and he held it there. Snow fell on his white hair. He let it. The cathedral clock struck 4. It struck 5. At the first gray of 6, the chaplain came forward with the wreath of evergreen the city had laid the afternoon before, and the king took the wreath from him and walked the 3 paces to the foot of the plinth and laid it on the granite under the helm. He stepped back. He resumed his place at my left. The dawn came up cold and slow over the cathedral roof, and the snow stopped, and the plaza began very quietly to breathe again. At 7 the relief came. He marched up in the cold gray light, a young corporal I had taught the present arms to 4 years before, and he took the post from me with a salute so still it might have been carved. I returned it. I stepped down. I came to the foot of the plinth one last time. I did not kneel again. I set my white glove against the polished steel of the railing for 1 second, and I took it away. The king looked at me then for the first time in 4 hours, and he gave me the smallest possible nod, the kind that does not travel past the 2 men who share it. I returned it. He turned and walked back across the cobblestones to his car and was gone. I marched out of the plaza under the colonnade. The crowd parted for me slowly without a word. The old men's hands came down. The veterans' arms came down. The cathedral choir went back inside. Somewhere down on the river, the early trams began to ring their bells again, and the city, which had held its breath for 13 hours, let it out. The papers that morning did not have a headline. They had a photograph. It was the helm with its crown of snow and the kneeling guardsman at its foot, and underneath it, in small black type, a line I have kept folded in my wallet since. On the 7th of November, the city remembered. That is the story. I went back to my quarters and I slept for 10 hours. My wife did not wake me. When I came down the stairs at evening, she had set out a single teacup at the kitchen table, and on the saucer she had placed a small paper card, and on the card she had written in her careful hand one word. The word was the name of my mother's father's brother, Lieutenant Aelric Halberd of the Saltgate Lancers. I held the card for a long time. I did not weep. I drank the tea. The regiment is the country. The country is the regiment. 100 years is a long time to walk past a name without stopping. A man in scarlet wool, on one knee under fresh snow at 2 in the morning, is not very much. But it is the marker the country had asked for, and the marker did the thing the marker before him could not, and the city saw it, and the king came, and the snow held on the helm until dawn, and on the 7th of November in the plaza of St. Aldwyn, the names on the third face in the third column down were not cold. That is the most I can tell you. The rest is the post, the rest is the helm, the rest is the snow.